Oh.
Good evening or good morning, wherever you are in the world. I'm Regina Yao, founder and president of the Pixel Project, and welcome to the Pixel Project's YouTube panel session series featuring live stream sessions with activists, advocates, and experts about violence against women from around the world. So, the topic of this evening's session is Depp versus Heard, a 21st century domestic violence case of terrifying precedents and teachable moments. The Johnny Depp versus Amber Heard case, which Depp won on 1st June 2022, has exposed many ugly truths about domestic violence, sexism, and misogyny ever since Depp started going on a public rampage against Heard in 2018 for writing an op-ed in the Washington Post without naming him about her experience as a survivor. These include the prevalence of post-separation abuse as a way for abusers to punish their victims for leaving them, the persistence of the myths of the perfect victim and mutual abuse, the public's lack of understanding about the complex dynamics of domestic violence, and the ingrained misogyny in society and sadly many women. The ramifications of this case, amplified by an extremely hostile and aggressive online campaign that Depp used to unleash his toxic fan base and misogynists worldwide unheard, has badly affected victims, survivors, advocates, and women. It also bodes badly for efforts to combat domestic violence and other forms of violence against women in the future because Depp has set several precedents that provide a new blueprint of tactics for domestic abusers and rapists and other upholders of misogyny and the patriarchy. So here to discuss Depp versus Heard and its ramifications with us this evening are two veteran domestic violence experts. B. Cote, who is at the bottom of the screen in blue and in the lovely hat, is a therapist and advocate who has worked exclusively with abusers for over 20 years. She is the founder of Impact Family Violence Services LLC, which provides abuser programs, also known as domestic violence intervention programs, in 5 North Carolina counties. B trains and consults regionally and nationally on all facets of domestic violence and intimate partner abuse. She also founded a nonprofit organization, Step Up to Family Safety, which provides access to domestic violence and veteran intervention services and support programs like Legacy. On my right is Julie Owens. Julie is a domestic violence attempted murder survivor who has developed a hospital crisis response team, a transitional safe shelter, victim advocate certification courses, and faith leader training programs. Before retiring, she also directed trauma research projects at the National Center for PTSD, managed shelter programs, worked with substance using survivors, and oversaw state funded domestic violence and sexual assault victim service agencies. Julie speaks, trains, and consults on trauma and violence against women. Now, you, the audience, will also be able to ask them questions live. Just make sure you're logged into your YouTube account so that you can type your questions into the chat box to the right of the YouTube screen. And Anusha, who is today's producer and chat box moderator, will relay them to me to read out to a panel to answer. So welcome, B and Julie, and thank you for joining us for this vitally important discussion. So let's get it rolling. Now, as domestic violence experts who have worked for decades in the field, you both immediately recognize that Johnny Depp is the abuser and Amber Heard is the victim, even though the majority of public opinion, or so it seems, is quite the reverse. So, why do you think large numbers of the general public who are following this case seem to be unable to distinguish between the abuser and the victim? Some even going as far as to invoke the myth of mutual abuse, saying that both Depp and Heard are as bad as each other. So, who wants to go first, Julie or B?
Julie, go ahead.
Okay. Well,
I think the reason that most people don't recognize it is because most people don't even understand what domestic violence is. First of all, it's not been defined for them, uh, and so there are so many myths and misconceptions out there about what it is, and victim blaming is so pervasive in this culture that to understand it is really unusual. You have to be taught about it, and because of patriarchy and misogyny and the influence on society, women are often targeted in many different ways in society, and it's just kind of not questioned. So first of all, we have to educate people about what domestic violence is and isn't. And to me, a lot of the people who believe Johnny Depp are sincere. They truly believe that when you support Amber Heard, you are supporting an abuser, because not only do they not understand what domestic violence is and isn't, they don't understand how to tell the difference between a victim and an abuser, because abusers do the same things victims do, and victims sometimes do the things abusers do, but for different reasons.
Okay.
I saw this happening before with O.J. Simpson, with our music artist Chris Brown when he abused Rihanna. And so I think a lot of it is this hero worship. And I think it starts from that. We really do not want to believe that the people we idolize have feet of clay. And so we're going to look for any reason to find that that is not so, because that then shakes our beliefs in our own judgment, and we may have to think about it differently. And so, yeah, we see this happening time and time again, and it really makes you wonder why any victim would come forward.
Mhm. So, in a significant number of domestic violence cases, it is difficult even for experts to tell who's the victim and who's the abuser. Could you share some insight about how we can identify them accurately, Julie?
Well, as I said, so often victims will do things at what we call resistive violence. They'll respond to the abuse or to the violence by or out of fear or resentment or self-defense or retaliation. And so it may look like they are being abusive when they're actually responding to abuse. And we call that resistive violence. Also, abusers want to play the victim. They want to convince people that they're the victim. And so they act the way people think victims should act. And this is what happened in the Depp Heard case. He seemed very, kind of relaxed and easygoing and smiling and all. And she was very, nervous and upset and uptight. And this happens in court all the time. So people just make the wrong assumption about who they are. And we see this all the time. We see probably 1 in 3 of the people being arrested for domestic violence is a woman, and most of them are victims. So not even the police can tell the difference between victims and abusers most of the time. It and sometimes even experts can't. It There are big differences, but there are also big similarities, and we can talk about some of the specifics in this case if you like.
Yeah. Well, B, you had I know you did a like written interview with us for our blog, and you've listed out some of the things that we should be looking for. And you also, when we posted about it, when Pixel posted about it on our Facebook page, you very kindly left a really great comment, like telling, teaching everybody, giving everybody some in the comments thread, some insight about how you actually identify who the abuser is. And I would also like to mention to everybody who's watching today that B made a really interesting comment, which was in her abuser group, in the batterers group that she runs, all the men could immediately see that that was the abuser. So can we just run through some of the red flags that you've been talking
Right.
about?
And that's why a group program is the only kind of intervention that works with abusers, is because they can smell each other's BS, right? They can call each other out because they are them. And so they have the same belief system. And I think what's really important to know, and this is how I immediately knew that Johnny Depp was an abuser. I mean, there were lots of other signs too, but almost all of my abusers, and that's all I work with. I work with their victims trying to get help, but my primary client is the abuser. And almost all of them really believe themselves to be the victim. Because they've been hurt. Now they've been hurt because they've been to jail for the first time. They've been hurt because the word on the street is ruining their reputation. They may have lost their jobs. They may have lost their marriage, access to their kids. So they are hurt. Their feelings are hurt. And if their feelings are hurt, then they must be the victim. What? And if they are the victims, then who abused them? It's the victim. And so when they come into my program, I just take down information. But they often say to me things that really expose their thinking that they are the victims. And so if they strongly believe themselves to be the victims, how easy do you think it's going to be to convince everybody else in their lives, because they're telling their truth? Mm-hmm. And so Johnny Depp may very well believe himself to be Amber Heard's victim because she hurt his feelings, because this public exposure of his abuse has hurt his reputation. But so he believes himself to be the victim. So it's not then acting that they do, acting so much like the victim. They do in court try to act like they think victims should act in court. But it's just really easy to convince people who care about you when you're being honest. And that's their honesty, as twisted as it is. That's their truth and their reality.
So you actually said that look for who holds the power in the relationship.
Right. And so, and that's sometimes very hard to tell. And so, but the person with the power in the relationship, if there is abuse, is going to be the abuser. Even if the person who claims even to be the abuser is actually the victim, it gets very confused. Mm-hmm. And Julie brought up some statistics earlier, or somebody did, about like 1/3 of the people arrested are women. When we look at hospitalizations for injury due to domestic violence, it's 95% are women. Yep. And so look at the disparity there. You know, what's going on? Right. So and the other thing I want to point out is that most domestic violence is not criminal. Most domestic violence is not arrestable. There are no criminal offenses in the huge majority of domestic violence. So therefore, how are people going to identify what's going on? We know that repeated beatings, we know that's DV, right? We see that on the billboards. But do we know about financial control and financial abuse? There are no billboards that tell victims that they're victims of financial abuse. And so how do they know? So when you look at these relationships, you have to look at who has the power in the relationship. And that may not be who has the power on the surface. So I have a little exercise that I do to help people determine who has the power in the relationship. So say Julie and I are married, right? And my old college roommates are coming into town for a reunion. We haven't seen each other in 15 years. And I tell Julie we're going out that weekend. Julie, are you going to be okay with staying home with the kids Friday night while I see my friends? Julie's like, yeah, no problem. Well, later on in the week, Julie starts saying things like, I don't know why you want to see them. Why do you even want to see people you haven't even seen in 15 years? Everybody's changed. They don't mean anything to you. It's not like they do anything for you. And so Julie starts making comments like that. And I'm getting a little shaky, but I'm not saying anything because Julie's promised to watch the kids so I can go out. Come Friday afternoon, Julie comes home from work. I'm getting ready to go out. Julie hops in the shower. She comes out of the shower and gets dressed. And I'm like, where are you going? And Julie says, oh, I'm going out with some of my friends. I said, no, 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 no. This is the night I'm going out with my college buddies. And Julie says, well, I guess you'll have to figure it out. And she puts her shoes on and walks out. So who's the default caregiver of the children?
Yeah.
Who has the power to just leave without any repercussions? So there are little scenarios that you can play out like that to determine, who has the power in the relationship. In this relationship, Julie had the power. I am now not going out with my friends because I can't get a sitter at the last minute. So Julie has pulled a power trip on me. Sorry about that, Julie.
Yeah, thanks, Pete. I'm always the bad guy, okay? Good cop, bad cop. But
and we see a lot of men do this, right? Like we see a lot of men do this, and they're not battering you, they're not hitting you, they're not whatever.
Right.
They're just doing. It's very passive aggressive.
It's very passive aggressive. We have on our power and control wheel that we use, and everybody should be able to Google or access a power and control wheel for whatever language, whatever faith, whatever demographic that you're working with. And on my power and control wheel, where the original one says minimization, denial, and blaming, mine says using obfuscation, because that includes more things just like that.
Yeah. All right. So let's talk about the terrifying precedents set by Depp versus Heard. So it has set a number, like we published an article talking about 4 very, very disturbing precedents that it's set, and how it would adversely affect efforts to combat domestic violence and violence against women in general in the years to come. So using the courts to prolong control over the victim is a very common post-separation abuse tactic. I think there's a term for it, right? It's not legal abuse; it's something else.
There is legal abuse. There's litigation abuse.
Yeah, litigation abuse. That's the term for it, everybody. Litigation abuse. And Depp went a step further. He went after her in courts in 2 countries, on 2 continents, in order to get the result he wanted by suing her for defamation. More than that, his status as a global celebrity and trendsetter basically legitimized the use of defamation suits as the legal weapon of choice for abusive men. I mean, this was already happening, but the fact that he did it and he succeeded in doing it gave it like a veneer of respectability, for men to do it, abusive men to do it. And in fact, his very good friend Marilyn Manson has already filed one against Evan Rachel Wood, whom he battered and raped during their relationship. So what are your thoughts on this? And what do you think can be done to counteract this cruel tactic that re-traumatizes victims and frequently leads to their financial destitution?
It's really difficult because, especially since Me Too started, we have just seen an explosion of defamation lawsuits at workers who claim sexual harassment, and people in different situations, not just domestic violence situations we're seeing. And we have seen abusers over the years use this tactic, but also students who, in a college, for example, who have been raped, bringing charges or claiming that they have been raped, they have been sued. And the problem is here in the U.S., you're liable not just for what you say, but what ordinary people actually read between the lines from what you say. Also, you're liable if you publish a quote from someone else that is defamatory, even if you quote them accurately. So it's as if you can only say what you can prove, or you can be sued. And this is the thing about it. It's very difficult. How does someone come forward and speak their truth and talk about what happens without being sued? So, yeah, not every abuser is going to use this tactic. First of all, ones who are powerful and wealthy are more likely to do it because it's an expensive thing to do.
Right.
But they do it.
But
And
who usually has the wealth in the relationship?
Well, typically it is the man. And we're talking about, heterosexual relationships. Of course, this can happen in same-sex relationships as well.
Sure.
But there are not laws against this. And this is the problem. We need very specific laws that address domestic violence related stalking in very clear, direct language in order to be effective. And there's only one state that has done that so far, and that is Tennessee. And in that state, a judge can actually prevent an abuser from filing suits against their victim for 7 years. They can stop it in its tracks. In Washington state, there is a law that's not specific to domestic violence, but it's similar. It completely disallows these frivolous lawsuits. And there are what are called SLAPP laws, which are in numerous states, over 30 states. But they're more general, but they are about defamation. So, I think we're going to see some more of these laws coming into play so that victims actually have a way to speak the truth without being punished. But before that happens, we are going to see many, many more of these lawsuits, I'm afraid.
And I think we've gone backwards. I've been reading that the Me Too movement has actually hurt women because, and I'm not sure how that works, but so women are finally coming forward and coming out, right? And so there's been a trend of clapback to all the lawsuits that have come because of the Me Too movement. And that's all because we still don't have the power collectively, right? So our voices have risen up, but we've been met with retaliation from the people with the power who could have made things better as a result of Me Too. And in some states, things are better. And I would like to see how they enforce those laws, right, Julie? Mm-hmm. When they can't even enforce laws of horrible physical abuse in many cases. In many states, including here in North Carolina, you could serve more time in prison for killing a Canada goose than you can for disabling your victim.
Yeah. And abusing an animal here is a felony.
Right.
But abusing your intimate partner is a misdemeanor.
A misdemeanor.
So what's really wrong is that the abuse of women is not taken as seriously as it should be. It's not treated as the horrific crime that it is. And
well, not always a crime, but I think and that's part of the problem, I believe, is that we are criminalizing everything instead of, and we can't criminalize everything, right? But are there other ways of holding abusers accountable for their behavior rather than through the courts? We're not really looking at that.
Well, you know, I've worked with victims for over almost 35 years, and I've seen the backwards movement to be. It was easier to get custody of your child 35 years ago than it is now, for example, because the men's rights movement and the fathers' rights movement has worked very hard and put a lot of money into making the family courts more father friendly than mother friendly. And there's a huge bias against women in the courts. It's not just family courts, but the family courts is where we see so much of this kind of thing, frivolous litigation going on, when the abusers just keep their victim in the courts for years and years and years. It's just ongoing. And because of that, what I'm seeing is a lot of victims are deciding they're not going to really use the criminal justice system or the family court system to the best of their ability. You know, that was always the go-to thing. People would say when someone's being abused, okay, call the police, get a restraining order, file for custody. And, you know, these kind of little rote advice, recommendations, well, they don't always work. Sometimes they backfire. And they're just as likely to create harm as they are to help.
Like Amber Heard, right?
And yeah, exactly. And so as a result, those of us who work with victims are having to change how we talk to them. We have an obligation to actually teach them the reality and prepare them. And if we can talk to them before they leave their relationship or before they take action and do safety planning with them and risk assessment and all of that, we need to be telling them, think about this, because it's not always a positive outcome. We're seeing a lot of accusations of parental alienation syndrome, for example, junk science. So there is pushback that is happening more and more. And I think the backlash is real. And as you say, it's not just physical abuse. Coercive control is really what we see most of the time. It's like taking someone hostage, essentially. The abuser knows everything about this person, and they use every bit of that information against them to control them and manipulate them. And it's not just what is done to the victim, it's what's taken from the victim. Their freedoms are removed, their independence is removed, their autonomy is removed. And you can't see that, and it's not against the law. So we have to understand that domestic violence is not about a behavior problem. It's a belief problem. These abusers believe they are entitled. And because men have had essentially legal control and actually ownership of women until not all that long ago, it's not surprising that.
And you mentioned entitlement, and that's like my secret code to abuse, right? Why do people abuse? Why do men abuse? And it's because they feel entitled to whatever it is, and most of that is power and control. And I say this too, Regina, and I've said this to you. Power is a belief system. You feel entitled, right, to have power. Control is the behavior that comes from that belief. Okay, so you control people because you believe you're entitled to the power to do so.
And we can see that in Johnny Depp's declaration, right?
Exactly.
He said, I am going to destroy her, globally, publicly humiliate her. That is all about power and control.
Yeah. And the more privilege, the more levels of privilege they have, possibly the more entitlement and the more resources to be able to hurt her. So Johnny Depp hits it on all counts. He's a white male, hugely admired, successful, and wealthy.
Yep.
And he's basically he's not just teaching her a lesson, and stuff. And he keeps saying the money doesn't matter, but basically he's trying to financially destroy Amber Heard.
That's right. And this is one of the, when you talk about the difference between a victim and abuser, right here is one of the biggest differences. Only abusers do that. Victims don't do that. You know why? Because victims are too afraid. And Johnny Depp is not afraid of Amber Heard, but Amber Heard is afraid of Johnny Depp. And that is the biggest difference between the two. How they talk about each other and treat each other, and how they fear or don't fear the other are the biggest telltale signs to me about who they're. And there's a lot of others, believe me, but those are huge, because research shows that the one thing all victims have in common is fear. And fear is what gives that abuse its power. And when
that may not be obvious at first, and victims are not going to admit to being fearful, especially at first. Right. But you absolutely nailed it. Victims do not try to drag their abusers through the court and destroy them.
They're trying to get away from them. They
don't
like
their life done.
I think what Amber Heard said at the end was absolutely what most of, if not all, victims would say. I just want him to leave me alone. Yep. I just want him to leave me alone.
Yep. And the other thing is, she was saying, I wish Johnny well. I love Johnny. Stuff. She wasn't trashing him, and the horrible stuff he said about her and the names he called her. And
but it was just a joke, Julie.
Classic. Yeah, you're not repeating that here. But
no. But that's a huge difference. Victims would not do that. They're too afraid.
Yeah.
And they're usually, that's not where they're even coming from. They're nurturing usually.
And Julie too, when they share children, victims almost always want the children to maintain some kind of relationship with their father at the beginning. And that may be why they don't go on the attack, why they don't go on the run, why they are on the defensive immediately, right? And that's what happens. They're on the defensive immediately. Once she files for divorce, he's going to get a lawyer. Usually he can afford a better lawyer. And they're going to take her to court and try to get her for everything before she can even respond.
Yeah. And it's about retaliation.
Absolutely.
Really. It's you left me and you'll be sorry.
How dare you?
And again, with that entitlement.
Yeah.
Who do you think you are to leave me?
and it completely dovetails, with the research. I think that the first 6 to 18 months of leaving your abuser is the most dangerous time.
It is. The most dangerous thing a victim can do is leave an abuser. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And this is why what we need to be doing when we know someone's being abused is we want to help them get to domestic violence experts who can do a risk assessment and help them develop a personal safety plan. And preferably before they even tell the person they're going to end the relationship, or maybe they don't need to tell them at all.
Even if they decide to stay.
Right. So, well, they need a safety plan then too.
Absolutely.
But the most dangerous thing they can do is leave. And that's what people don't understand, because, the general public is, well, why didn't she leave? Why didn't she leave? Why didn't she leave?
Yeah. And I have friends who helped help domestic violence victims leave. And when we're doing the planning, it is nearly always, watch his schedule. When is he out of the house? When is he going to be out of the house for at least an hour or 2 hours? Mm-hmm. Get your bag ready. Don't hide that bag. Don't show any outward signs that you're packing.
All right.
Right. Get enough cash if you can.
Yeah.
And wait, and we're gonna come and get you. And we've heard of cases where people are leaving in the middle of the night while the abuser is asleep, sneaking out and hoping that nothing creaks, nothing squeaks when they open and shut the door. Yeah. and that's not the end of it. This
That's just the
mitigation
beginning.
abuse, post
My heart
separation
is
abuse.
racing just thinking about this. Can
Yeah.
you imagine living this?
Yes.
Yes, you can. Yes.
Been there.
Yeah. Yeah. And so if my heart is racing at just the pressure, the overwhelming pressure of having to try to do this in a way that's as safe as possible, especially if you're fleeing with children, right?
Yep.
And I know for sure that some of my clients have driven the mother of their children away at gunpoint or threatened to kill the children if she ever came back. And he then claims to be a single dad who raised these children on his own because mom abandoned them.
Oh, yeah.
Imagine what that does to the kids.
Mm-hmm.
And so there are a lot more bodies too than in the body count. Because when we look at murder statistics, we are not counting the cases where the police aren't sure. And we're not counting the cases where women are never found.
And we're not counting the attempted murders like mine.
Right. Huge problem.
How many of us somehow survived?
Right.
But we weren't supposed to.
Right. And maybe survived with awful injuries, that they had to deal with the rest of their lives.
Yeah. So let's talk about the next precedent that the Depp versus Heard case sets. So conducting a smear campaign to destroy the victim's reputation within families and communities in order to take away any support that she might receive and to isolate her is a classic abuser tactic. However, Depp has taken this to another level by using social media and the televising of the trial to humiliate Heard in front of a global audience with the aid of his fandom. So were either of you surprised at how the Depp versus Heard trial went so aggressively viral and so successfully triggered a tidal wave of misogyny against Heard worldwide? I mean, personally speaking, I was shocked but not surprised.
No, I wasn't surprised at all.
The shock was at the level at which it spiraled, but nobody's surprised, right? Is anybody in this discussion
Nobody in this field should be surprised. What does surprise me is how many survivors of domestic violence have taken Amber Heard's, have taken Johnny Depp's side, and then get furious when we challenge that. Because I think what they're doing, and Julie, you can help me with this here because I really still can't figure this out. I think that what they're doing is projecting their own experience onto this situation. And I don't know, Julie, what do you think? That this has been probably the worst thing of this for me, is to watch something that I never thought would happen.
It not only survivors, but people who work in the field, advocates, people who run shelters. That is mind-boggling to me. But having overseen shelters, I understand that a lot of times the people who run them or the people who work there are not well trained at all, and that's not their background. They're hired because they're social workers or something like that. So, that is not so strange. But I think you're right, B. I think that they do over-identify with Johnny Depp because he seems likable and believable.
Not at all like their batterer.
Right. And I think a lot of it is they just don't like how Amber Heard presented herself. She wasn't fun and funny and lighthearted and cute and all of these things that he is, in a sense. She was very, nervous and uptight and upset. And and so she wasn't someone who elicited a lot of empathy.
Right.
And I think that's a big part of it. And I do believe the victims who are so upset because people like you and I are saying there is no question who the abuser is here. You've got it backwards.
None.
They're so upset because it is as if we were attacking them. And I've actually had them say to me, I've been through that. I'm a survivor. I know. I say, I am too. Let me tell you something. We are experts in our own experience, but most of us aren't experts in domestic violence. Most
Right.
of us don't have the training or an experience. Most of us haven't worked with hundreds or thousands of victims.
Right.
And so when victims assume they understand domestic violence because
How
they've been
dare we
there.
attack what they see as professionalism, right?
Yeah.
They see themselves as professional advocates
Right.
and
And
so
they are experts in their own experience.
in their own abuse.
But
And
a lot of times they blame themselves. They say, oh, they'll incriminate themselves in court. I was such a bitch or whatever. And they're not lying. And just like Amber Heard wasn't lying, she wasn't denying hitting him. He was denying hitting her, another big difference.
can you
And,
imagine if she had flirted in court the way he did?
oh,
Can
wow.
you imagine what the response would have been if she had been charming and smooth and funny and flirtatious?
Yeah.
I mean, she couldn't win. She could not win.
Yeah. Yeah. So
Yeah.
it's so tragic, but to me that is one of the most tragic outcomes of this is that it has divided the survivor community.
Yeah.
And we need to not be divided because we already have enough opposition coming from abusers in the men's rights movement, in the
Right.
fathers' rights movement. We need to be a united front. And that's going to be our big
And
challenge.
that's the other thing that it exposed, right? This trial, which is internalized misogyny can be weaponized because we all still live in a patriarchy. We still live in a system. We still live in a society where every system we have is, is weighted, is tilted towards male entitlement, what they're entitled to. And a lot of women who are domestic violence survivors are still have some internalized misogyny. And I can tell you that for sure because my own grandmother, God rest her soul, she passed away a couple of years ago, but she lived, she was of the generation where you couldn't get divorced, where it is not socially acceptable to get divorced. And she put up with my grandfather, my drunken, my alcoholic batter of a grandfather for more than half a century of marriage. And she herself has internalized misogyny. She says stuff like, my daughter's kids are my outside grandchildren. I mean, I'm of Chinese heritage, so that's actually a term that says outside grandchildren. They're not really my grandchildren because they don't share the same last name. They don't share the same family name. So I'm thinking that the same thing applies to many of the domestic violence survivors who are women who support Johnny Depp because they're not aware of this. They're not aware that this is colored the way that they see, this has shaded the way that they see the case.
I was just thinking when you were saying that, Regina, how in some of my more rural counties here in North Carolina, what I've uncovered is that women have survived the patriarchy in their communities by workaround, right? And I saw this in Russia 21 years ago when I went there on a domestic violence exchange too. In communities where women are heavily oppressed, what happens is that women work around the systems that are in place. So they'll have like these secret meetings but they don't address it as going against the patriarchy. They're working around it. And so when women come in and want to address it head on, these women are very protective of a system that they have built or that they have generationally adopted. Right, of workaround, and they may not even recognize. It's like the time I was told one time, Julie, you'll remember this story maybe, where I was having a meeting with a judge, and I had 5 students, all women from that community, who told me that I needed to go to this meeting wearing a Sunday church dress but show a little cleavage
Oh, God.
and
No.
talk about my church and my kids, neither of which I have, and then bring the judge some muffins
Oh,
with
God.
a nice towel over the top. This
Oh,
is how I was told to address a judge, a peer with the same level of education I have, right, in a professional meeting.
Mm.
Then, so I told somebody who was from that county, a woman, and she laughed and clapped her hands in delight. And she said, yes, that's what you have to do to get your way around men.
It's so tragic.
Right,
the,
right,
the,
right. That
and
is, what do? You're talking about generations.
You
And
know
you
what?
see it as a game, but the men don't see it at all. They don't see how they're benefiting,
Right.
right?
You,
how do you think we can reduce this, though? I mean, the internalized misogyny, it takes a lot of work, right? Like,
It
it
does.
takes a lot of admitting some truths about your community, about your culture that is so difficult to admit. And I am saying this from the point of view of someone who comes from a very, very patriarchal culture. Chinese culture is so intensely patriarchal, and I can't tell you how many times I got grief from when I was a kid and pointed out that's not fair. Why does he get to do that and I don't? Because this is double standards, right? And the women in your family can, even in your family, they can like slam down hard on that.
yeah.
That is not appropriate behavior. You don't say that. You respect, whatever male relative or
You
whatever,
don't fight it. You don't address it head on. You
Yeah.
do it the way women have always done it.
And this is what happens in churches all the time. I
Mhm.
do a lot of training in the faith community and have for years because my dad was a pastor and he was also a victim with me. And what happens is women who come forward and talk about the abuse are alienated and even excommunicated or basically kicked out of some of these more conservative churches because you don't do that. You don't talk about that in church. You don't get a divorce.
No.
And women in the church will often turn on the victims. And this is called horizontal hostility. It is a dynamic that we see a lot of times in different groups where there is a power differential. It was, and I think of this as like often I see women who have been prostituted or trafficked who are who really are so identified with their trafficker and their abuser that they've convinced themselves that they're making a choice, that this is what they want to do, that this is their career, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And it's as if they have become a party to their own abuse. That it's not that they asked for it or wanted or deserve it, but they are so blinded by this power imbalance and by this dynamic which they have bought into to survive that they cannot see it.
It's Stockholm syndrome, right? It's
It
Stockholm.
is. And there was actually a book, great
Yes.
book written called about societal Stockholm syndrome.
And I
It
think
is.
this is what we see in the Depp versus her case, to bring it back to what we're talking about, is she's literally getting, I mean, I got slammed, in my own community and family, for just speaking out about it, right? Like
Mhm.
she's getting stumped on by the entire world. I mean, what feels like it. And
Mhm.
like getting back to the discussion about the precedents, I mean, do you think that abusers were now, I mean, we've heard of technological abuse, right? Like Apple just, for example, tech companies are slowly taking measures to address this because you can track like abusers. We've heard of cases where abusers use apps to track
Oh, yeah.
their victims, their wives, their girlfriends, their kids on their phones, and
Right.
they force their victims to keep the app on, right, and keep their phones on wherever they go out, so they can track them.
Yeah.
And then Apple has actually just announced that they are tackling this issue with some kind of I can't remember, but I just saw the headline yesterday, something about permissions and privacy. But everyone just go Google Apple and click on news, and you'll see the latest
Right.
latest announcement.
My guys are using cameras all over the house.
Yeah,
Moving the cameras.
and do you think that this use of social media, right, to amplify the post-separation abuse is something that abusers are going to take, follow Johnny Depp's lead on, because he basically weaponized social media.
Absolutely. Well, he's weaponized not only the courts, but the social media. You're absolutely right.
Yes.
And I think we're already seeing it. Victims are telling me that this is being used against them, that they are being threatened with being sued, and they don't know what to do. They don't know if they should take action, try to get help or not. They don't know if it's going to make it better or worse. And that's a horrible position for a victim to be in, because society has re-victimized them and has colluded with the abuser.
Yeah. And and here's the other thing, that precedent that has also been set, the fourth one, which is also pretty terrifying. And I think, based on, there's a pretty lively discussion going on in the chat box about this, is about, being attacked for supporting Amber Heard. And one of the things to notice is that, the fourth toxic precedent that Depp has set is a normalization and amplification of attacks, not just on the victims, but also on their supporters and advocates. And it got so bad during the trial that Heard took the initiative to ask the judge to seal the identities of the jurors for up to a year following the trial. Now, they, leaving aside the fact that the jurors really did not do their duty, because, there are reports coming out that one of them fell asleep, another one lied about his birth year, another one had they were sequestered. But leaving that aside, it was so intense. I can tell you now that when that NCADV, the National Coalition Against Domestic Violence in the U.S., when they were posting news about the trial, when they were posting support for Heard, they got slammed. I was on their page. They got slammed by so many domestic violence victims, hundreds of them, in support of that, and being very verbally abusive towards, NCADV. And on a smaller scale, when Pixel posted a very thoughtful op-ed from I think it's a lawyer, if I remember correctly, and she was talking about how this, if we don't believe Heard, we won't believe victims, because there is no perfect victim. And she was talking about that myth. And I'm going to tell you now, I spent because we're all volunteers, so that day that was me on duty, I spent 11 hours moderating that comment spread. I had to delete all the abusive abusive messages from Depp supporters. I had to do that because it's our policy that we do not trigger survivors. We do not trigger victims. We can have difficult discussions on our page. Okay, we're not tone policing, but we feel that, do not go on the attack. That's not a discussion. That's an attack, and that would trigger someone else.
Yes. And
it was 11 hours of that till I locked the comment section. Well, B was in that comment section, being very thoughtful, helping people understand how to identify abusers. I locked that comment section because I had to get sleep. And when I locked that comment section, they spilled over onto other posts on our page.
Oh, wow.
Complaining that we locked them out. That
They're so angry. They see us as now abusive. Right?
And that's the split that's happened in the survivor and advocacy community, which is tragic.
It is. It's absolutely tragic, and it's caused a lot of problems. I've lost colleagues and Facebook friends because of this, but I'm not going to stop speaking out. These guys are so good. I just thought about something. These guys are so good. I have one who was committing a lot of post separation abuse, and he was so good that her attorney believed that he was the better parent.
Oh gosh. That's how good abusers are.
Because mom was crazy.
Yeah.
And that's how they label us, right?
That's right. That's right.
That's what you do. And then that's what some people who, people like Clementine Ford, or Clementine Ford, she's an Australian feminist, and she spoke up for her a lot. And she is a champ. She takes on the really difficult stuff. She gets attacked by MRAs, incels all the time. And basically she said that's the thing that they label us with. And it goes all the way back. And it doesn't even go all the way back. I can tell now. Okay, so we have a anthology, right? Pixel is a charity anthology about abusers getting their comeuppance. And one of the stories is actually based on something that happened in Victorian times in England, which is men who want to get rid of their wives just declare her mentally incompetent, or their daughters who are speaking up against them, and just get them locked away and medicated.
That's right.
In asylums and sanitariums. And this is like the 21st century way of pardon me everyone. This is the 21st century way of doing that. You call someone crazy, and then you get their credibility tarnished, and the way and this is what I noticed. You can't call a man crazy. No one believes you most of the time. But if you label a woman crazy, if you label her disturbed, crazy, if you trot out a psychiatrist, oh God, like Depp trotted out.
The modern versions of hysterical.
Yeah, they're modern versions of hysteria, just to punish them. You don't even need to lock someone away into asylum or sanitarium anymore.
Right.
They're locked away in this cage of public opinion, right? That labels them
right
crazy. And
exactly. It silences them. And that's what abusers do. If abusers cannot completely destroy their victim, or they will try to silence them. And that is exactly what Johnny Depp has done. He is trying to silence her. And he's done a great job.
He's using public sentiment.
Right. He picked Virginia. He picked the state of Virginia because he knew it was strategic, because he knew the advantage it would give him on social media, and that all of his followers would flock to him. Right. If this had been a courtroom where it had been not been recorded, he wouldn't have had all these people on his side.
Well, and he's the one who made that happen. Then there again is another huge difference between victims and abusers. You will never find a victim who wants their trial televised.
Right.
That's the last thing they want.
No.
Only an abuser would want that.
And here's the thing. It was explained to me by a good friend who's an attorney who's handled divorce cases and abuse cases and all. He said that the other thing that was strategic about choosing Virginia is that it has the weakest anti-SLAPP laws in the US. If Depp had filed in California, where he and her are resident, and which makes more sense, right? You're resident in that state, you file in that state, right? That it would have been thrown out before it even got to court.
Yes.
Yeah.
Right.
Look
at
the case in the UK. The judge ruled in favor of the son, that said that it's not defamation when you're telling the truth and you're calling him a wife beater, because he did it. He did it. And it's not just one incident, right?
Yeah.
The judge reviewed a mountain of evidence, talked to everybody, but he didn't make the decision lightly. He got two other judges
Mhm.
to review the mountain of evidence, and
Mhm.
and they all ruled it, and they ruled that Johnny Depp could not appeal because that was it, that was final. I mean, what is there to appeal, right?
Right.
The evidence is there. And what gets so many of us who see this train wreck happening in Virginia, in the Virginia case, is that the evidence is out there. People have gone to court to testify that they saw what happened, and people are still believing that.
Yeah.
Doctors have gone in to say he chopped off his own finger. There was no way that someone else could have chopped it off, for example. People have gone in to say that I've heard that, I saw that, right? Amber Heard's therapist said that she has, there are records of this.
How
Amber
about
Heard's,
the
Well,
text
he
message?
even told his doctor that he
yeah,
had done it. Or
yeah,
he said, I need to not do that again.
yeah.
Yeah.
And people are, and that's what, and what's so terrifying is that, again, going back to the power and control thing, is that Deb has so much money that he could wage a war against her, a public relations war against her online, with his lawyer leaking an edited, a sound bite that
Yeah.
seems to show that she's the one who's the abuser. When actually, when you listen to the entire recording, it's that. And all that stuff going on, right? And it's terrifying, because think about all the wealthy and powerful men in their communities, the pillars of the communities, the ones that have the biggest house in town. They can do this. They can see that, and they go, oh, right, I can just hire. And there are firms who do this, right? I mean, marketing firms who specialize in, I mean, Pixel is completely online. Like, we do all our advocacy work, our prevention work online, educating people through events like this, through a whole bunch of things, right? And we've done it for the last almost 14 years. And we know that landscape. We've seen, people hire, they're experts in doing this. I used to work in public relations, full disclosure. My first, I used to work in publishing and public relation, marketing and public relations. This is absolutely a public relations school. This is
Oh, yeah.
him going on the offense, him having enough money to hire the people who are extremely good at this.
They're fixers.
Yeah.
Yeah. And there are so many tools. I mean, someone in the comment section mentioned Gamergate. It all comes from there, right? Online attacks, doxing, um, going into online communities and spreading falsehoods. Everything,
Right. Right.
creating a myth around whoever you want to.
Kind of like what Russia does.
Yeah,
you
yeah,
know,
yeah.
it's unbelievable. Uh, it's just mind blowing to me that
Yeah.
he has done such a perfect job of weaponizing everything related to this, and it's just textbook. And I'll be surprised if his methods aren't copied by other abusers for years and years and years to come.
And that's terrifying. That's so terrifying, because this is not just bad mouthing you and trashing your reputation in your own family and community. This is enlisting the wider public, the general public, to do that. This is enlisting your acquaintances. This is enlisting people who maybe know you marginal. I mean, it won't be on the
My
scale.
belief in her was shaken, right? My belief in her was shaken by people who are professionals in this space, because they were like, well, she's really unlikable. And I'm like, well, yeah, she just kind of is. And so for my belief in this to be shaken, the people who don't have 22 years, 35 years of history and have seen thousands of cases, of course their belief is going to be shaken,
Right.
because it's working.
It's not just you, it's, I've had a member of my team talk to me privately. I'm not going to name her, but, just as an example, she said, She basically said that she's ashamed that at the beginning she believed that, and that but what happened was, and here's the important thing, she caught herself,
Right.
Yeah.
and she sort of took a step back, and this is what I think a lot of people have needed to do. Okay, take a step back. So I want to share this because with everyone who's watching this and who will watch this. If you catch yourself believing something bad about someone because a whole bunch of people said it, but those people don't really know that person, they're just repeating what they're saying, that, whatever someone's told them, right? Take a step back. This is especially true for social media. I'm not saying this, don't do this if it's, uh, if it's off social media, but for social media especially, take a step back. She took a step back and she started reviewing, going through, tracking what's happened. And then she asked me, because she's busy, she's a mom, she volunteers her time with us. And the other thing, she took a step back, she realized that, oh, because I'm so busy, I might have missed stuff. Everyone's busy. We're all coping with the pandemic, right? We're all coping with, it's a really tough few years. So first of all, take a step back. Second of all, get information. She asked me, so I sent it to, sites, reports by the BBC, by CNN, and all that were reporting on the UK case, because they reported a whole bunch of, why did the judge make this decision, right?
Yeah.
So that was the clearest way of figuring out. And then after that, she said, okay, so what else can I learn about this? I said, okay, look at the power and control wheel, and then observe how he's behaving.
Mhm.
And then she came back, she said, okay, and this is the thing that people, like you said earlier when we first started this discussion, people don't want to admit they're wrong. But please admit to if you don't, in cases like this, of domestic violence, if you don't admit you're wrong and you're complicit in helping an abuser with his post-separation abuse, that's even more wrong.
That's right.
It's
But
even
I
more.
think we need to be kind. We need to be kind to people, because if I can fall for it, anybody can.
Yeah.
If Julie can fall for it, anybody can.
The information, right? And
Right.
that's the thing that's PR team did so well. They carpet bombed us
That's
with the
that's
wrong
exactly
information,
right. That's a great term for it.
and people were so taken in with that. And there was so much noise. I'm going to call this noise. There's so much noise surrounding the whole case that the information, and people were actually saying, I mean, I had victims and survivors say to me, and I've observed this in conversations in safe groups, like safe as in nobody's abusing anybody, and the moderators are kicking out anyone who did this. Everyone's like feeling isolated, and that's the interesting thing about, and scary thing about this. It's not just Amber Heard who's feeling isolated, it's everyone else who believed her feeling isolated until they're in a group, and then they started talking to each other and go, wait, no, I'm not crazy. Like, that, you use the word crazy. Some people say, like, I thought I was imagining things, that that I was the only one who thought that Depp was the abuser and Amber was the victim. I'm just paraphrasing the whole bunch of conversations that came out. And that's the thing, right? That's the insidious thing about what's happened with using social media, with attacking
Right.
supporters and advocates en masse, and carpet. I'm going to use the term.
Sexual abuse, okay? What they did to Amber Heard on social media, and I'm talking even survivors, victims, and experts, was abusing her.
Yep.
It was re-abuse. And so y'all need to check yourselves, right?
Yep.
Why
They
would
colluded.
you re-abuse somebody publicly and then claim to be an advocate?
Right.
Yeah.
I was the same way. I didn't know. I kept hearing all of this stuff about Amber Heard, and I was not following this case because I was in the middle of a whole bunch of other stuff that I had to do. And finally, people kept asking me for my opinion, and I said, I'm going to just have to examine this and try to figure out what's what. Yeah, is she the abuser? Is he the abuser? Is it mutual abuse? What is it? And that's why I got the power control wheel, and I wrote that 27-page analysis and went through one thing at a time, because I had to figure out what was going on. And by doing that and using the power and control wheel and what we know about abusers and victims in terms of their behaviors and characteristics, and
it was clear as slung mud.
that was the only way to do it.
Yeah.
And so many people still believe it was mutual abuse. They're both awful. It's not mutual abuse either. She was using resistive violence. He was using violence. And mutual abuse has to involve people with equal power. It's not equal abuse.
No
way. It's not mutual.
No, if there is a power differential, then it is never a mutual abuse. And a totally equal power almost doesn't exist.
So you don't have two abusers or two victims.
Right.
You have one abuser, one victim, and they both might be getting hurt.
Right. And I
might be doing awful things.
That doesn't mean that the victim may not use aggression or violence.
Exactly.
Right? But it doesn't make it abuse. Okay?
But they're doing it out of fear and resentment, and he's doing it for power and control. And that's what people don't understand.
Right.
It's apples and oranges.
Completely.
And the most extreme version of this, I think if anyone's watching this and you're a newbie to the myth of mutual abuse, now think about this. And a reactive violence, right? Think about this. What are victims supposed to do if he's coming at you with a knife, with an axe? What are you supposed to do if he's going after your pets and your kids, right? And so many women are in prison because they killed or hurt their abuser in self-defense. They used reactive violence. I mean, I think in California, Governor Newsom just pardoned a woman who's been in jail for how many years?
24 years.
She pushed back.
Do people honestly believe that women don't die fighting back?
Right.
I mean, almost all victims fight back unless they're fawning, as a trauma response. But almost all victims fight back at one time or another. And so that's why, Julie, I saved mugshots where the abuser has a lot of injuries, right?
Right.
And that doesn't make him the victim.
Right.
It just means she fought back.
Exactly. Yeah. This is what we got to somehow educate everyone about, but especially advocates. I just think that we don't have any sort of united front around domestic violence in this country, at least. We don't all agree on the definition. We don't agree on the statistics, and we don't agree on how you tell the difference between a victim and an abuser. And that's part of the problem, because you'll find a website somewhere, and maybe many of them, that are going to, validate your erroneous beliefs. And and some of them are national, well-respected organizations. And they're using really awful statistics that make it
out of context, or people pull like that terrible statistic about like 1 in 7 men or 1 in 10 men.
Right, that's from
they take that completely out of context and don't understand that doesn't mean that 1 in 7 women are abusive.
No, because most of the men who are getting abused by men.
Right.
It doesn't put this into context. It doesn't.
But they're not even getting violently abused or hurtfully abused.
And abuse is not the same thing. As I said, it's apples and oranges. The way that men abuse women is not the same way women abuse men. No. Women don't rape men. Women don't usually torture and completely control their lives. You know, it's different, and that's why you see survivors having such bad trauma reactions and PTSD and dissociation and stuff like that, because they're the ones who were afraid. They're the ones who were traumatized. And even abusers who are injured don't have that.
Yeah.
What's funny too is that when my guys come into the program, not only do they believe themselves to be victims, but they also believe that it's a women's world and that women control everything, and that the courts are always on the woman's side. And they all know somebody, if not themselves, who has been abused by a woman. And it's kind of like the sexual assault case that's been, how long has that been since what's her name cut his penis off, cut her husband's penis.
Lorena Bobbitt.
I mean, right. So this kind of stuff happens to women by men every day, but we don't hear about it. But we're going to come up with that one case 35 years ago, you know, where a woman sexually mutilated her man, right? And so these guys come in and they all have examples of where a man has been abused. And of course, they're getting that from this person who's reporting that he was abused by a woman. It's not necessarily fact.
Right. You know, because he was raping her on a regular basis and torturing her. But men are cutting up and stabbing and burning and torturing women all day, every day, all over the place. It's just like the Susan Smith case. You remember the woman who drowned her little boys?
Oh, yes.
Like a mother kills her children. It's headline news. Men do it every day. Abusers do it constantly.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So
but you don't hear about it.
Yeah, so we have about 50 minutes left. Someone made a really interesting observation, like that you wouldn't believe the conversation that's going on in the comment section.
I want to know.
Really great. But someone pointed out, you know, we were talking about bad statistics. So Q Waken, hi, thanks for joining us today. They said a lot of these bad statistics are from the conflict tactics scale, CTS. And despite all the bad statistics and the criticisms, the creator of the CTS seemed to defend it until his death.
Actually, I don't think he did. I think toward the end, he said, this is not how this research was supposed to be used. This is not how it was supposed to be.
That's right. Richard Gillis wrote an article called Not an Even Playing Field. And he went point by point about how the statistics had been misused and misinterpreted and misreported and how much damage they have done. And he debunked it all. It's very
and those are the statistics that the MRAs use.
That was Murray Strauss and Richard Gillis who did that early research. But it illustrates the problem, because it's like with the CDC, 1 in 4 women, 1 in 7 men. You know, how those statistics are gathered, you know, is critical. Are they calling people on phone, asking men and women, or have you been abused? You know, how are you doing?
The one that Pixel is going to start using from now, that recently it was published by, I think, UN Women and the World Health Organization. They actually looked at long, they looked at hundreds of research cases, hundreds of research being done.
Did meta-analysis.
Yeah, they did a meta-analysis, and oh my goodness, the statistics of violence against women is horrible. More than half of women under the age of 50, girls between the age of 16 to women under the age of 50 have been abused by a partner.
At least 1 in 3 in the world.
Yeah, and they looked at all of it. They didn't just quote one. They looked at all of it. They aggregated it. They looked through, they sift through it for any dodgy, you know, research methods and stuff. And it came out with this. And people are still saying that it's fake. And I'm like, oh.
And I want to point out, Gabby Petito, Amber Heard, both admitted to striking their partners. And so we took that and ran with it, right? So see, she's just admitted to being an abuser. That's what happened to Gabby Petito. That's what happened to Amber Heard. So they're being honest. So when we collect this data, have you ever hit your partner? You see, it's taken out of context. And if somebody were to use that and they would say, well, here we've got two women who openly admit to having assaulted their partners.
Right.
So we have about, sorry, what were you going to say, Julie?
I was just going to say, just a little caveat here. A lot of people use the term reactive abuse for what victims do when they respond. Let's not use that. It's not abuse. It is a response. It is resistive violence. That is the official term that we use for it. It is in response, but it is not abuse. And we have to be very clear about that.
Good point.
Okay. So we have about 10 to 15 minutes left. So let's talk about teachable moments and moving forward beyond Depp versus Heard. So, you know, DV experts, feminist activists, and domestic violence victims have pointed out that regardless of whether Depp or Heard ultimately wins the trial, because Heard is, you know, she's going to file appeal, the damage has been done. Many DV victims who have been thinking about leaving their abuser are now even more afraid to do so. And many survivors who would have spoken up about their experience to help others may decide to remain silent. And abusers are using, you know, Depp versus Heard to terrorize and gaslight their victims. I mean, we literally hear about now, you know, abusive husbands and partners calling their wives and girlfriends and partners Amber. That's horrible. So let's talk about what we can do moving forward. So from your perspectives as experts who have trained and consulted with many DV advocates and organizations over several decades, what are your thoughts on what DV advocates can do to meet the challenges in assisting victims whose abusers have already started taking a leaf from Depp's post-separation abuse playbook, which includes using social media and defamation lawsuits to further terrorize and silence them, as well as anyone who attempts to help them? I think we're including this because victims can't get out without help. And if people who are going to help are also being terrorized, it's going to make it even worse, isn't it? So what can DV advocates do?
Well, I think one thing is we have to, as I said earlier, we've got to educate victims and survivors about the risks and the pros and the cons of participating in systems voluntarily, like the criminal justice system or the court system. Let them know that it's possible that things are going to get turned, the tables are going to get turned on them, so that they don't go in blindly thinking, oh, mom's, of course, I'll get custody of my child, for example, because, you know, I don't abuse my kids. He does. He's using drugs or whatever. You know, they need to go in eyes wide open. And I think we need to let them know about resources too. There's a couple of websites I want to share. And I don't know the people who run these websites or who have created the information, but there is information for victims and survivors about this kind of abusive litigation. And one of the places that's got some good information is Survivors Guild, Guild, survivorsguild.club. And there's information on that website about what to do if you get sued by your abuser. And there's a survivor defense toolkit, they call it, that is a kind of a comprehensive guide about what to do if this happens. Also, there's an organization called legalvoice.org, and they've got this whole information page on litigation abuse with resources and so forth. So I think we need more of this sort of thing, and we need to educate advocates about resources, and we need to develop our own so that we actually have tools to put in the hands of victims and survivors. We want to educate them, but we also want to give them information and resources so they can do their own, they can make the decisions about what they want to do, and they know what to do when and if something like this does happen.
Yeah, and also what's going to be interesting is how such toolkits can also be customized for legal systems around the world, because you know, domestic violence is worldwide, and I wouldn't put it past abusers in countries outside, you know, outside the US and North America and the UK and Europe to also try doing this and dragging their
Right.
systems through the court, because that
Oh,
does
yeah.
happen. And you have, and in many countries you have even less recourse to help.
That's right.
And what I would add on to what Julie was saying, but look at a bigger picture. Make sure that everybody pulls the post separation abuse wheel and looks at that and makes that available to their the victims and survivors that they're working with. Also educating people in the court systems, educating the police about the fact that most domestic violence isn't criminal. And so if they're responding, there may be an opportunity for them to educate and provide resources, even if they can't make an arrest. Working with the family law attorneys to understand what's going on with this post-separation abuse. And another thing, I've got to make a pitch for programs like mine that work with the abusers. This is so important. Every single time your community has a conversation about domestic violence, it's imperative that you include the people who work with the abusers in that conversation.
And I think in many countries they don't yet. Like domestic violence services focus on survivors and victims, and not enough on the men who commit.
Right. And my hashtag says only abusers can stop abuse.
It's true.
Yeah, it's a choice, right? They made a choice. They have the power and control. They chose to do this.
Right. So if we don't work with the abusers, then we're completely ignoring trying to fix the problem.
At the same time, we have an obligation to educate victims and survivors to know that abusers are not likely to dramatically change and not be abusive. So we have to give them a realistic appraisal, a realistic idea of, you know, what you can do. If somebody wants to change, they can. And here's where you go to do it.
Oftentimes it's going to be for the next relationship and for the kids if they make any improvement.
And it's and there was a conversation in one of the groups I was in. It's a choice. You know, it goes back to that really horrible old adage that many misogynistic men have, is that there are girls that you sleep with and there are girls that you take home to your family.
Yeah.
There are women that you sleep with and there are women you marry. And this absolutely points to as a choice. It's their choice about how they treat different women.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, I would just add also that as a movement, those of us who work in the field or who are, you know, have been advocates for years, we need to organize. The men's rights movement, fathers' rights movement, they're organized. You know, they're working in every state.
Got money.
They're trying to get laws passed that require 50-50 custody.
Right.
So we need to be working in the courts. We need to be talking to our state coalitions against domestic violence, or, you know, wherever we are, whatever those local entities are, to work on getting laws introduced and passed that will specifically address domestic violence related stalking, have very clear, direct language in order to be effective, not generic. And they have to give judges the power to prevent abusers from filing these kinds of lawsuits. And so,
I'm going to point out too, I think that's very important to have that legislation there, those laws there. But that also takes us to the next thing I was going to ask you that's related to what you're saying is, how can legal professionals, the judges, lawyers, and other professionals, working in the court and legal system, due to support domestic violence victims like Amber Heard and how they can avoid being complicit in it. Because we all know, right? It's not enough to have the law there. It's not enough. We need the people in the courts. We need the judges. We need the juries. We need we need everyone to enforce those laws. Because if you don't enforce the laws, what good is it? It's just sitting there, right? So
Right.
I'm sorry I cut in, but that I just realized that we need to talk about this. But
Well,
how do we do this?
it's about more than attacking and winning, right? Attorneys have to kind of change their mindset to doing what is best for their client, whether their client is an abuser or a victim, right? Because what's happening is that, all right, the most dangerous time for a victim is when she leaves. That's when the courts become involved in these post-litigation cases, right? The tensions are high. You may have his attorney who's really pushing him to be really aggressive when going after her, really, go on the offensive, right? When going after her. Well, instead of going after her for everything they can get before she can respond, talk about what is best for him. And it may not be destroying her. And if an attorney is complicit with destroying the victim, what is he actually doing for his client?
Yeah. Well, that would bring something else to mind. I think the biggest mistake that Amber Heard's attorneys made in this case was they never did call a domestic violence expert witness.
Bingo.
That's just blows my mind, because the job of an expert witness is to educate the jury and the judge. And an expert witness in domestic violence, or preferably a bunch of them, could have done that. They could have dispelled the myths. They could have explained resistive violence. They could
People
have
think that
explained why victims
psychologists are
don't
domestic
like
violence
likable.
experts.
So more of us need to become expert witnesses in the court. And it takes a lot of time to get the confidence to be able to do that. And it takes a lot of skills. You have to work at it, and it's kind of scary at first. But victims need us to do that. And even short of that, we advocates need to be writing very strong letters of support to the court. There have been several cases that have been overturned on appeal because I was the expert witness in the case, and I wrote a letter outlining all the evidence that she was a victim and this is what had been done. And they won the appeals because of that.
Yeah,
we have to have experts working on it who get it.
Yeah, and I had actually had, a mother of a rape victim who's underage. Like, she asked for a letter from Pixel to support what they're saying, right? And so, and to, provide some information about all of this, a general information about rape and all that to the judge, because this was, the ruling was going to come in, and they were so worried that he was going to go scot-free, right?
Yeah.
And her daughter's a young teenager. We wrote that letter. She presented it. He did not get off scot-free.
That's awesome. Do you know how rare it is?
He got sentenced.
It's very rare.
And oh my God, that was.
But advocates don't write letters. Most agencies won't let them.
Don't let them. All they can write is the date they started again.
I mean, even if you don't want to, if you can't, go on the stand, right? But if you get a summons from court, if you get asked by, for a case, how can you not weigh in if they're asking for your expertise?
Because grants will limit people.
Not only that, their agencies are afraid of being sued. There's just all kinds of reasons why, it's become, the whole industry has become so social worky, and, advocates have to be in this little box. They can't even speak in court, which, advocate, it means to speak for, right?
I was just surprised that they didn't call someone who's a national expert like Landy Bancroft.
It's unbelievable.
Right? Landy Bancroft has gone in. And
her attorneys they didn't understand domestic violence either. If they did, they would have done that. That's a terrible thing.
Judges too, right? That judge was, I think a lot of cases could have, the victims or survivor could have won the case if the judge had not been prejudiced. Yeah. And we see this most clearly in not domestic violence cases, but cases of rape. Because you remember, what was the case? My brain is fried. Sorry, I said my inside voice out loud. The case where the swimmer actually sexually assaulted a drunk woman, Jane Doe, who's now written a book. Her name's Chanel Miller. Brock, what's his name? Brock.
Charter, something like that.
Yeah, Brock. Let me check.
Brock Martin or something like that.
Chanel Miller. Brock Turner. Yeah, the Brock Turner case, right? And they got that case. There was a huge backlash because the judge was gonna just let him off with like a slap on the wrist. And then, anti-rape advocates took up, they banded together and they took up this cudgel and went, oh, he's just that. And, I think that the judge got disbarred, didn't he? Because of that case, Julie? I think so.
You know what? I don't recall, but I know that some other survivor advocates and myself got a judge kicked off the bench. And we have to be bold about these things, like the women who are now protesting in Washington, D.C. and across the country around the dissolution, essentially, of Roe v. Wade, that the right for a woman in the U.S. to have an abortion. We've got to get organized, and we have to be bold, and we have to do sometimes outrageous things to get the attention of those in power. And
yeah. Oh, sorry.
We just can't be sweet and take them cupcakes or whatever that was that B said she was advised to do.
Oh, for the Brock Turner case, Misty 306, who's a regular attendee of our live stream session, she says, yes, the judge lost his seat. And She said judges earn their seats through elections and that judge lost.
Well, see, in some states, they're elected, in others, they're appointed. So where they're elected, you have the power to educate the community and try to influence that election, how people vote. But where they're appointed, there's always something like a judicial selection commission, and you can always write a letter of complaint. And I've done petitions to them to say, look, this judge has done all these things to all of these victims and survivors. And so there's always something that we can do, but we have to be organized to do it. And we have to be bold.
And I'm in favor of, judges and lawyers getting educated before they even take the bench. I mean, before they even go to court, that part of the education and training should be about domestic violence and, sexual assault cases and all. And they should incorporate it. I think in certain countries and certain states now, they have to do it, or counties. But it's a really, really slow slog uphill to actually get it incorporated into their training. So if anyone who's watching this, if this is something you might consider doing, if you work in the legal profession, is maybe campaign for anyone who's going to be a judge to be educated about violence against women, to be educated about domestic violence, to be
If they're
educated
going,
about rape.
it needs to be required curriculum in law school if they're going into family law. Just like it needs to be required in seminaries for people who are going to be pastors, who are counselors.
Yeah.
We need to have it embedded in educational programs and as a regular part of the curriculum, not just an elective course.
And speaking of pastors and counselors in the church or any other religious religious institution, like I think there's at one point there was a hashtag called church too. So you go on Twitter or you go on Facebook and or Instagram and type enter that hashtag church too, and click and go read what people are saying about church too. So Misty said something that's really important. She said, if teachers have to attend seminars for active shooters, then judges should be educated in some of everything.
Yeah, right on.
But remember that the cases are often settled or before they ever get to a judge. So it's got to be those processes that work too.
Yeah. And Q Waken said, Quaken said, can I be honest? I'm no longer convinced that education is enough when it comes to DV. I met many DV workers who are supposedly great for it because they're highly educated. Yeah. And even people who train workers in DV who then express varying ideas about DV. And Quaken, I think that's where what Julie says comes in. We need something across the board. It just seems like, I mean, the domestic violence movement is very much like the wider feminist movement, where they're all different strands and schools of thought about it. But here's the thing with domestic violence and any form of violence against women. It's there. What is there to argue about?
Right.
There are things that we all know that the system everywhere needs to be overhauled. We have seen what works. We have seen what doesn't work. We have seen horrible mistakes resulting in femicide and the deaths of children because people didn't take action. People went by the system, which in some cases, in many countries, is designed to slow things down, to trip things up. So we need to, what Julie says is absolutely correct. We need to unify, but to unify is going to be difficult. It's always been difficult for the movement. So we need to go to our final question, which is, so we talked about what DV advocates can, a little bit about what DV advocates can do. We talked about what we can do about judges and lawyers and all, and what they can do. So now the final question is, what can individuals and communities do to support DV victims like Amber Heard who are being subjected to post-separation abuse? And how can us, avoid being complicit in it? So what can we all do? This is a very generic question, but we got to all start somewhere, right?
Well, I think doing what we're doing now, having forums where we're discussing, clapping back like we have been, with information, with good, solid information. And you know what? I've had a lot of people reach out to me individually as a result of my advocacy for Amber Heard. So specifically because they've seen me post on social media. And so now they come to me and they say, Julie, I'm sure you've seen the same thing. And they're saying, I saw what you said and I agree with you. Yeah. But these are people who are too scared to speak out for themselves. So we need to understand that we have a responsibility with our voice and that our voice goes beyond the social media. And so we have to, continue to use that responsibly, but also to back other people up when they speak out. So, for instance, if one of those people were to say, I wanted to say something, but I'm too scared, tell them, go ahead, say it, and I will respond. I will comment on your comment. You know, so maybe that's a small thing, but maybe that's something that we can do.
Yeah. And people are saying, why are all these voices against Depp only surfacing, being heard after the case has, you know, for
Hmm.
all has shut for now. And I'm actually saying to them, I'm like, it's because we were drowned out, and it's because a lot of us felt so isolated, and because a lot of us have seen what happened to some of the bigger names who are speaking out, like Clementine Ford, like NCADV, and and then people got cold feet and just did not want to get into that because it is taxing. It is basically like, it's basically like a mob online. It's basically like you say something and like 20 people are going to jump on you, and then other people see that and they're scared and they're not going to speak up to say anything about it to you. And I'm going to tell everyone that what B said is absolutely right. Back each other up. I mean, I spoke out about it, right? and
Hmm. Hmm.
and here's the important thing. I at first I didn't say anything because I wanted to make sure that I got all my facts right. I read about the case and all, and then I started to speak up. And then I had people I knew who I unfriended because they were all proudly supporting that, and they were all, one even said that if supporting that means that you think I'm a misogynist, I'm proud of it. I actually blocked him. And basically, but I got support. It wasn't that many people supporting me. It was, and here's the thing: people are saying, well, what about men? Don't they get abused too? Guess what? The men who supported me are the men who were victims of abuse. Their fathers abused them so badly. They were victims of abuse, right? And they saw through that. They said that is like reminds me of my dad, and they would get of my dad, and and they were getting triggered as well. But they also spoke out. They backed me up, and it was so important that that Julie and B, I'm telling everybody here, it's so important that they backed me up too. And then on Pixel's Facebook page, you notice, B, even after I got rid of all the abusive people, all the abusive comments, there was still a lot of comments there, and there were 20 over people who were backing up what the op-ed was saying. So once you start backing each other up, and you can, and here's what I noticed: once I
There's
got
power
rid
in
of all
numbers.
the Depp supporters who
Yeah.
were being abusive, who were laughing at people and things like that, when people's voice, when you can see on the page that people speaking up, it was very clear that there was that many people speaking up. People started being more brave. They started coming forward. They got the courage up, and they started speaking out. So back each other up. So that's
Well,
me.
we talked about earlier how some people are constrained from speaking out because of the systems they work with, the agencies they work for, the grants that they're under. And so, what I would suggest to those people is go to your bosses and say, what are the real limits to my speaking out and advocacy? Because it may be just like rumor that's been going down the pike for years. Oh, you can't say anything on social media. So find out, what is the truth? What can I say? What can't I say? And if I can't, why? And fight that system. Fight the system that hobbles us.
And if you can't do it, find somebody who can.
Like
Because there are always people who don't work in that system,
right.
or who don't work in that agency, and maybe they can help. And again, like expert witnesses, but they don't have to be expert, but somebody who can actually participate in that particular trial or circumstance to intervene. And I've done it in many different venues,
Yep.
written letters, or gone and educated somebody
And you can talk
on
to
another person's behalf.
politicians. as a private citizen.
Yeah. So it doesn't have to be, but you can, and also connecting victims and survivors with other victims and survivors, because there's power in that, in that sisterhood. That is how I know I and many others of us that are survivors really found our voices, because we all supported each other, and we had a group that believed us, that related to us, that understood what we were talking about, and gave us courage. And I think we need to encourage all victims and survivors to go to a support group for victims and survivors. I mean, more important than going to a mental health counselor or
Thank
anything.
you. Thank you.
You know,
And
trauma
and
therapy might be necessary, but above all, a support group with other victims and survivors is so powerful.
Safety
and
now.
we need to do this, and we need to do this, especially post, that we heard, because Depp and his fan base fractured. They fractured our community.
Yeah.
They fractured it, and it's so triggering, and it's so depressing, and it's so horrible to see women who should have been our allies speak up in favor of the man who embodies the abuser. And
Right.
I'm going to put this on screen. And Quaken says, thank you all for speaking out like you have. I've done some speaking out, but I'll be honest, I can find it to be a colossal effort, and I can end up very stressed and weepy. And I need to take a lot of breaks from talking about it, especially from debating with others about it. Take those breaks.
Absolutely.
You need the self-care, Quicken. We who work in the field. I mean, I work online, but Julie and we work face to face in the field. We do self-care. And for the longest time, those of us who work in advocacy and who are activists did not do self-care. And you see a lot of us flame out, but now there's a movement starting, and I hope you'll be part of it, Quicken, where we do self-care, and we check on each other. We make sure that we're okay. We make sure that if one of our co-workers or one of our colleagues or one of our sister advocates has been going at it too hard for too long, we actually tell her, go take a vacation, go decompress, 1 week, 2 weeks, do it. If you have to take 3 months off to sort out personal stuff and get some peace, do it. This fight is always going to be here.
Find a place where you can be yourself and be totally accepted. Where you could be, if it's your silly self, your profane self, find that space where you can let off steam and people are not going to judge you for it.
Compassion fatigue is real.
Yeah. And we hope that Amber Heard has that. We hope that she has people and circles that she can turn to. Because I'm going to say to everybody that before this all blew up, she was very outspoken. I think she continues to be, about violence against women.
Yes.
And supposedly she's now going to write a book, which really takes guts after what she's been through.
And, and nonprofits who have worked with her said that, she's dedicated. One of them said she's dedicated enough that when she was stuck in a traffic jam and she was supposed to go do a speech for them, she got out of the car, took off her shoes. Did she take off her shoes? Maybe not. But she got out of the car and she walked.
Probably.
Wow. She walked all the way to to fulfill her obligation about her, what she sees as her responsibilities. So we hope too that she's doing some self-care right now, because that was brutal. So anyway, we got to wrap up. Yeah, we got to wrap up because we've been at.
And I just mentioned the group Self-Care for Advocates is a great group that's on Facebook, and they do an annual conference, and it's all about supporting each other and taking care of ourselves.
Yep.
Yeah, join that group, because there's like thousands of us there, because it was started by Trace Fleming Smith, I think, and Trace is a wonderful person, and I think she started it after she's heard from too many of us that we are just in distress, because we see so much of this violence every day in our work. We have to deal with so many of these MRAs, these incels, these violent men. We have to deal with so much every day in our work, and it's heartbreaking to, when we get, emails, when we get phone calls from victims, and we need to help them, and sometimes we can't, and it eats away at us. And so I think Trace started this Self-Care for Advocates, and we would encourage survivors to also join the group, because there are lots of resources there as well that you can access, lots of links, lots of people sharing how they are decompressing, the measures that they're taking. And it's not just therapy, it's a lot of it is, how are you structuring your life outside work to help support you and your health on all fronts when you are at work. A couple more before we end, a couple more comments, 3 more comments from the audience. Mrs. says, Amber Heard plans to appeal the verdicts against her. Yes, we heard that, and hopefully she wins, because I'm just going to say now that jury was, no. And I'm just going to leave it at no. And Quicken says, thank you all for responding to my comments. I'm crying now from the kindness. Please look after yourself, Quicken. And Misty, please look after yourself. Misty's the librarian, actually. So she's the repository of lots of resources for education where she is. And Misty is great. And also, I'm going to say, Anusha, our moderator on the chat, in the chat box today, our producer says, Quicken, you're welcome. We know how difficult it is because of the work we do. You always have our support. There's a great community here. And here, Anusha. And one more thing, is Petunia there? Because Anusha says, is Petunia the dog just trying to make us feel better after this heavy discussion?
Pet therapy.
Here we go. It's
Petunia says hi to everybody.
Petunia's showing us a hug.
She just turned her back on you. I'm so sorry.
So I'm just gonna put this banner again. So if you're watching this to the end, today we talked about that. We heard a 21st century domestic violence case of terrifying precedents and teachable moments. We've talked about it for almost 2 hours because it is that important. It is that important, and we're on 2 different continents, everybody. I'm in Asia, and Julie and B are in North America. So we're talking about this. We've talked about this on a global basis because it is really that important. So anyway, before we go, Anusha has put loads of links in the chat box, and even if you're watching this up as a recording, just go to the chat box, scroll up and down. There are loads of links that Julie has shared, a whole bunch of resources there as well. So, okay, so we are going to say bye.
Julie is frozen in a,
Oh no, Julie's frozen.
I'm laughing so hard right now.
Pardon me. So, okay, so thank you all for tonight's thought-provoking discussion, B and Julie. Hopefully Julie will be back before we go off air. And thank you to everyone who has joined us for this session. We hope, as Misty says, we hope that more people watch the playback of this live stream. You can share your friends. It's at the same link that we are on right now on YouTube, so it's easy enough to share. Before we wrap up, here are a few more resources that you can use. So to find out more about violence against women and what you can do about it, please visit the Pixel Project's website at www.thepixelproject.net. We have a section called About Violence Against Women, About War. So you just point your cursor there, and there'll be a drop-down menu about, I think we've up to 12 different types of. We're going to be up to 12 different types of war, and we're adding more every time we get a chance. And also, please visit B's website at, I'm going to stick this in the comments now, at impact.org. Okay, and y'all can also visit Julie's website, where you can get that 20-something page long report about why Johnny Depp is the abuser and why Amber Heard is the victim based on the power and control bill, you can go to and see domesticviolenceexpert.org. So I'm going to put this on screen. So you can go to impactdb.org. That is B's organization, and you can to learn more about the Johnny Depp versus Amber Heard case and why Johnny Depp is the abuser and Amber is the victim. Go to www.domesticviolenceexpert.org. And I'm going to put our link on screen again to find out more about violence against women and what you can do about it. Visit the Pixel Project at www.thepixelproject.net. So we will thank you and we will wish you a great weekend. Well, Sunday, wherever you are in the world, because Saturday in the US. So a good everybody.
It's
And,
late Saturday.
please stay safe, everyone. We will be following what happens to Amber Heard's appeal, and we wish her all the best that she wins because, that she needs to win. It's important that she wins because if not, the abusers worldwide are gonna think that.
I sure wish you could choose another state.
Yeah. Okay. So everyone, please have a great weekend. Stay safe. Okay.
Petunia can also be reached at my website.
yes, Petunia can be reached at the website at impactdb.org as well. Good night.
Thank you so much, Regina, and everyone who participated and helped, and all of you who came in and visited with us and listened and shared. We appreciate